Today we are going to be looking at graphing linear inequalities. That's going to be page 76. Okay, you want your title page over here on the left and the other page on your right. Okay, so when we are looking at graphing inequalities today, we're talking about some of those same concepts we learned when we were graphing on the number line, except now we're going to have two variables. Okay, so when we are graphing linear inequalities, we want to remember, though, that concept of that open circle versus that filled in circle, right? Where that open circle said if we had something like x is greater than 2, that meant we could get as close to 2 as we possibly wanted, but we couldn't actually have 2. And that's the same idea we're going to have show up here, except now instead of it being circles, since we're on the coordinate plane, it's going to be lines. Okay, so if we have an inequality symbol that is greater than or equal to, instead of having a solid circle or a filled in circle, we're going to have a solid line. So a solid line underneath means a solid line when we graph. If we have an inequality symbol that is greater than or less than, no solid line underneath, then that is going to be a dashed line when we graph. Okay, anything that's greater than, so greater than or equal to, is going to be to shade above. Anything that is less than, right, less than or equal to is going to tell us to shade below. Okay, so less than is lower. Still have that L thing going on. Less than was left, now less than is lower. Now this came with one small catch before, and that same catch still applies. The only way that this rule works is if we're set up in a specific format. And that format has to be that the y is first. Okay, so it has to be like solved for y, and the y is first. So like y is greater than mx plus b, except obviously whatever inequality symbol in here could be different. So if we have y is less than 2x minus 3, we are going to use those exact same rules we talked about with slope-intercept form. So we're going to pretend for a moment that the inequality symbol isn't there and that this just said y equals mx plus b form, right? And so we know that the number in front of the x is our m, and our b is then going to be negative 3. Okay, so we're following those exact same rules we did with y equals mx plus b. Then we'll take our inequality sign into consideration. So this type of inequality sign tells us we want a dashed line, right? Less than is dashed, no solid line is dashed. And a less than also tells us that we want to shade below. So to then translate this onto our coordinate plane, okay, we're going to start just like we would graph normal y equals mx plus b form, normal slope-intercept form. So we're going to start at b, which is negative 3. Okay, we also know that we want our slope to be in fraction format. So if it's not a fraction, we put it over 1. So from this point, it's telling us how many we need to rise and how many we need to run. So we're going to rise 2 and run 1. So I'm going to rise 2, run 1. Now, we said before that we wanted to at least do that twice and get 3 points. However, to really have our shading all the way on this coordinate plane, we want to make sure that we are getting this all the way across. So it's really helpful if you can give yourself a few extra points here to sort of make sure, because that shading is going to be important that comes up. Now, you don't have to do all of them, but just make sure you're not getting a line that's totally skewed. Now, this is a dash line, so I don't just want to draw a solid line in here. I'm now going to make this a dash line. Okay, and that dash line means we can get as close to that line as we want, but we can't actually be on that line. Okay, and then we are going to shade below. Now, some of my students are better at seeing below than others. So if it's easy for you to see that below is on this side, great. If not, I always tell my students to imagine a bug walking uphill, right? So if we have a bug and it's walking uphill, what would be the ground? The dirt, right? That would be the stuff underneath it. Now, when we shade this over here, we want to make sure that we shade it enough that we have covered all of this area. So not just so little that we're only getting this little part here, but we also don't want it so solid that we're coloring in it with solid ink, because that's going to be a problem in the future. So make sure we're going all the way up to the line and getting this area, okay, but not so dark that it's one massive ink color. So now let's talk about what this means. This means that any point in this shaded area is an ordered pair that's a solution for this inequality. So for example, if I were to name this point right here, okay, this is the point 7, -1. 7, -1 should be a solution to this inequality. So if I plug in 7 for x and -1 for y. Okay, so -1 is less than 2 times 7 minus 3. 2 times 7 is 14. 14 minus 3 is 11. So is -1 less than 11? Yes. So this point is a solution. However, any point that happens over here, like this point here, this is not a solution. So then the tricky piece is, what about what's happening on this actual line? Okay, and when it is a dashed line, it is not actually part of the solution. So these points that we plotted here, this is not a solution. So if we pick this y-intercept, it's the ordered pair 0, -3. So if we plug in 0 for x and -3 for y, we get -3 is less than -3. And that is not a true statement. So that is not a solution because it falls on the dashed line. Okay, but any of these, all of these over here and forever extending outwards are solutions. So now let's look at this next one. 2y is less than or equal to 8x minus 10. Well, unfortunately, we can't find m or b, and we also can't decide our inequality rules unless this is solved for y. So the first thing that we are going to have to do is get this solved for y. So to get that y by itself, we're going to divide by the 2. And when we divide everywhere. So we will get y is less than or equal to 4x minus 5. Now we can find our m and b. Our m is going to be equal to 4. Our b is going to equal -5. This inequality symbol tells us that it is a solid line. And less than or equal to tells us that we are going to shade below. So now we can translate this over onto our plane. So now we are going to start at -5. So our y-intercept is -5. And then we're going to do a slope of 4. So remember, fraction form is 4 over 1. So we're going to go up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1, up 4, over 1, up 4, over 1, right? I'm just giving myself enough points to really get that line in there. I'm going to make a solid line on this one. So this one is a solid line going across my plane. And I am going to shade below. Okay, so a below is all this area down here. Again, I'm shading this, but not too much, but not too little. Look at number 3. Yours is going to be correct. Mine has a typo. So this is really going to say x is greater than -4. Now, we can't fill in an m and b because this isn't slope-intercept form, so we have to remember other ways that we graph it. Ways that we can remember. We can remember that we can create a table. We could remember to find an x and y intercept, or we could just know at this point that an x line is always a vertical line. Okay, any of those options would be fine. Okay, but if you need something to help you remember, right, maybe we say our x-intercept is -4, and our y-intercept is that there isn't one. So we'll go on our x to -4. And if we can't ever touch the y-axis, that's going to be a vertical line. Okay, so do we need this vertical line to be solid or dashed? This is going to be a dashed line. And greater than tells us to shade above. So I'm making my dashed line. This does technically go on forever. I typically forget to put my arrows when it's a dashed line. Now, above and below is a little bit tricky here when we have a vertical line. Okay, but there's a couple ways we can think about this. Well, we can either think about what numbers are larger than -4. Well, 0, 4, 10, right? All of these numbers on the right. Or we can think about our same shading rules that when we were on a number line. Greater than told us to shade to the right. So either way, we are shading over here. Okay, so that's definitely one that sort of doesn't fall in the norm. It's a little bit outside of our normal rule, and it's because it's not a function, right? Kind of keeps being our unique one. Okay, for our next one, again, yours is right. So if we have 2x minus y is less than 8. This does not say y equals, so this is not solved for y. Okay, so if we are going to solve this for y, the first thing we need to do is move that 2x over. I'm going to get a different color here. So let's subtract that 2x on both sides. Okay, so now we're left with -y. Subtracting is not a reason to flip the sign, is less than -2x plus 8. But we still have this -1 sitting in front of the y. So to get rid of that, we're going to have to divide by -1. That means divide everywhere. When we divide by a negative, that is a reason to flip the inequality sign. And we'll get y is greater than 2x minus 8. So now we can find our m and b. Okay, this is a dashed line. And we are going to shade this above. So I'm going to start at -8. Again, thinking about this as a fraction, I'm going to go up 2 over 1. Up 2 over 1, right? And I'm just sort of doing enough of those to make sure I get a good idea of what this line looks like. Okay, this is a dashed line. And we are shading above. So again, if we have that sort of bug over here walking uphill, oh, that's a headless bug, whatever, walking uphill, right? What would be above it? Well, that's the sky. So that'd be all this stuff here. Okay, then on our last one, y is less than, it's actually going to be less than or equal to 8. Okay, so for this one, if we're graphing this, our m, right, remember we don't see any x's at all, so our m is going to be 0. Our b is going to be 8. This inequality symbol tells us to use a solid line. And we are going to be shading this below. Okay, so I'm going to start at y is 8, so I'm going up to 8. And my slope is 0, so up 0 over 1, right? This is our horizontal line. This is going to be a solid line. And we are going to shade this below. So everything below is easy on this one, is all of that.